Hi, welcome to Toys in the Hood. This is the second part of our look at the origins of the Tyranids. So first up, just before I talk about all of these, it's worth mentioning that Tyranids don't actually name themselves. All the Tyranid creatures are basically named after whatever the Imperium and the races that have encountered them have decided to call them. Tyranids don't communicate with each other, at least not in any way that we know outside of the hive mind, so we don't know what a Tyranid calls themselves. Tyranids are organised into massive hive fleets, all linked by the hive mind. These hive fleets can sometimes splinter off and sort of form a splinter fleet, which is a smaller fleet, and they'll have their own characteristics. They'll evolve differently depending on what aliens they meet, what battle tactics they develop. Now, most of these hive fleets are named after ancient monsters, the three big ones being Behemoth, Leviathan, and Kraken. So, Behemoth is a creature from the Bible. It's a powerful grass-eating, river-dwelling beast with bones likeable to bronze pipes and limbs likened to iron bars. Apparently it's inspired by a hippopotamus, possibly, although I've also seen pictures that make it look like a brontosaurus or some other large dinosaur. This word has now become to mean something of monstrous size, power or appearance, very suitable when you're talking about an unstoppable hive fleet. Hive Fleet Leviathan. Leviathan is mentioned again in the Book of Job alongside the Behemoth. This is a giant sea creature. Today, again, its name is used for something enormous or monstrous size. And then there's Kraken. So mythical Krakens are thought of as giant squids or octopuses capable of bringing a ship down in the sea. Now, this kind of nautical theme I think works quite well for Tyranids as they're going through space. You can certainly see, in fact, when you look at the old like Space Fleet models, the Battlefleet Gothic ships, quite often they are like giant squids. I think there is even a Nautilus ship that they have. There's some, they really draw on this kind of sea creature idea. And as I said, there's smaller hive fleets too, and they stick with this kind of similar naming theme. So there's Skyla and Charybdis. So Skyla is a giant multi-headed creature in Greek mythology, and she would come out and she would basically attack ships with taking them off with these tentacled heads. You couldn't sail around her, however, and to avoid her, because opposite there was the giant whirlpool, Charybdis, and Charybdis would destroy your entire ship. And in fact, in the Odyssey, which is the story of Ulysses' trip back from the Trojan War, he is forced to sail through Skyla and Charybdis, and he chooses to go nearer Skyla because there's 6 heads on Skyla, they'll be able to kill 6 sailors, whereas Charybdis would have destroyed his entire ship. And that gives us the hive fleet: Charybdis, Skyla and Ulysses. So it's not the first time Skyla has appeared in a Games Workshop product. There's Skyla Athengrim. Skyla Athengrim is a Chaos Lord who is cursed to become a Chaos Spawn. And very much like Skyla in the Greek mythology, she was cursed to become this monster. Now, Skyla Athengrim has been, I think he's probably had the most versions of any model. I think there's 4 different versions. He's been playable in the original Warhammer. I think you could even play him in 40k because one of the older Chaos Codexes had rules for a lot of the same creatures in Warhammer and in Warhammer 40,000. And then he's also a character in Blood Bowl, and now you can play him in Age of Sigmar. So there's definitely 4 different models, and it's available to play in 4 different games. There's also Hive Fleet Gorgon, Hive Fleet Medusa and Hive Fleet Perseus. These all feature in the film Clash of the Titans. So Medusa is one of the Gorgons. They've got snake hair, she's got a snake body, you can turn people to stone by looking at them. Perseus is the creature who defeats them. Perseus uses the head of the Gorgon to defeat the Kraken. So Kraken we've already had as a Hive Fleet. There's also then a Hydra. Now, Hydra's not in film Clash of the Titans, but the Hydra is in Jason and the Argonauts. But these are all things brought in from Greek mythology. In fact, there's loads of hive fleets. There's certainly too many for me to run through here, but this one jumped out. So this is Hive Fleet Echidna. Echidna is a spiny anteater. It's one of 2 egg-laying mammals, the other one being the dug-billed platypus, and Knuckles, Sonic's adversary in the computer games, is an echidna. No idea why there's a Tyranid hive fleet named after it. So these hive fleets are led by hive tyrants. Tyrant is a word used in ancient Greek to describe a king who rules with absolute authority. It wasn't really a bad term in ancient Greece, but over time we've come to associate it as someone who rules with absolute power and oppression. And the hive tyrants very much rule the hives. Or at least that's the impression we get, because behind the scenes the Tyranids are ruled by Norn queens. Now, the Norns in Norse mythology are goddesses who are responsible for weaving the fate of humans. They have a big loom, they weave the fate of humans. And Norn queens are similar. They're responsible for the fate of the Tyranid Hive Fleets. I don't imagine them so much controlling the Hive Fleets directly, but sort of nudging them in that direction. So in the last episode, we saw that termagants were named after shrewish women. Now, unlike a lot of the races in 40k, there aren't really any historical characters that Tyranids draw upon, and that then influences the evolution of the creature, the evolution of the character. But what we do see in Tyranids is we'll see something like termagants. You'll gain them, and then part of their name will influence other names in a similar kind of species. So from termagants, and it's termagants nowadays, but originally it was termagants. That gives us gaunt, which does mean slender and slim on its own. But then we get hormagaunts. Now horma is Greek for assault or to act on impulse. Now what we've got with these hormagaunts is we've got these creatures that throw themselves at defences, thousands and thousands and thousands of them, until they overrun them. Very much acting on impulse. So hormagaunts, really good name there, that draws on termagants, but also reflects how the creature fights. In the new Leviathan box set, we're getting neurogaunts and we're getting barbgaunts. These are, again, they now become pretty straightforward. So neuro means relating to the nervous system. So neurogaunts extend the range of the hive mind. And then there's barbgaunts. Now barbgaunts are armed with biocannons. I think the most notorious biocannon, one of the bigger ones that springs to mind, is the Barb Strangler. So that gives us barbgaunts. I mean, at the very least they fire like thorns or barbs out. So sticking with the Leviathan box set now, the psychophage is someone who is totally consumed by what they eat. And a psychophage in the new box set is a creature that eats psychers. And I'd love to know which came first of these, kind of the model and the name, or the rules. But it'd be really interesting to know how they develop these things, and if that name has influenced what the eating psychers. And then there's Von Ryan's Leapers. Now Von Ryan's Leapers have actually been first mentioned in the Tyranid 3rd edition Codex. They're part of they're an offspring shoot of hormagaunts and lictors. In the background, Von Ryan is a guardsman who survives an attack by these creatures when they first appear. In our world, Von Ryan's Express is a World War II film that stars Frank Sinatra. Then termagant can also be spelt tervagant, which I think is where the name Tervigon comes from, these giant creatures that give birth to termagants. And one of the evolutions of a termagant is a gargoyle. So gargoyles are grotesque figures that you find on the edge of buildings. They're actually part of the drainage. So the gargoyle is called a gargoyle from the French meaning throat. That gives us the word gargle as well. And so what would happen is the gargoyles on the edge of these ancient buildings, the water would come through the guttering and it would spurt out of the gargoyle. Now, early gargoyles, their flesh borers are attached to their mouths, so they are literally gargling and spitting at their opponent, which I just think is a really, really cool naming convention. And we also know gargoyles from like the cartoons and things like that, the gargoyle being a kind of winged beast as well. And although the gargoyles would lose the gun, being part of their mouth, and they just start carrying it like a kind of flying termagant, they would still have a spit attack, so there was still some throwback to the origins of the name. And sticking with flying creatures, flying Tyranids are called Strikes. Now, the image I'm using here isn't a Tyranid strike, it's actually a flying hive tyrant from the Leviathan box set, but oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. So I thought I'd use that. Again, in the real world, a strike is a type of bird, and it's one that literally impales its prey on spikes. It's a really horrific creature. And you also look at the picture, it doesn't look like a horrific evil creature, but clearly it is. And Strikes is an awesome name here, but it's even more relevant when you get to the Raven Guard Space Marine Captain Strike, because he's armed with lightning claws, so he literally impales his enemy on lightning claws, just like a strike would on spikes. We've already touched on the Hierodules as a gargantuan creature, and some of the bigger creatures are named for their roles in Greek temples. So the Hierophant is a priest in a Greek temple. It's also a tarot card, which is where it might see more popular use. And then there's the Hierodule. The Hierodule is a slave or prostitute in the service of a temple. I guess this is because if you run into a scythed Hierodule, you're screwed. Then we carry on with ancient roles. The lictor is a Roman rank, sort of a bodyguard to the magistrates. I'm not really sure how that ties in with how a lictor works in Warhammer 40k, but it's a really cool name. And then a Carnifex is an executioner in the Roman army. Incidentally, Space Marines also carry a gun called a Carnifex. It's a kind of bolt gun, not a bolt gun like we know as in bolters, but a bolt gun like a cattle bolt gun that you'd use to execute cattle. And the apothecary uses the Carnifex to kill injured space marines before harvesting their gene seed. One of my viewers in the last video also pointed out that a Carnifex means meat smasher, so it's a butcher. There's a Haruspex that once again is a Roman rank. This time it is a kind of soothsayer or a priest that practiced divination, specifically using the entrails of creatures. Now, a Haruspex consumes biomass as it goes, so this kind of idea of ripping things apart and seeing their entrails I think ties in nicely with a Haruspex. It's a great name for a Tyranid creature. So Tyrannofex, the large creatures, isn't a Roman rank, but what it does do is it draws on the fex of Carnifex, and then it takes the Tyranno from Tyrannosaur, as in Tyrannosaurus rex, and gives us the Tyrannofex. So exocrine means an external secretion, like sweat, tears, just glands, and an exocrine is a creature that generates, so it excretes, bioplasma. Admittedly, it excretes at an incredibly long distance, so I've never met anyone who sweats quite like that, but it's a great name. And then that name becomes toxicrines. So toxicrines create like a kind of toxic miasma that offers protection on the battlefield to Tyranids. So then we get to the kind of the vors. So a carnivore, the vor in there means to devour. So a biovore, what a biovore does is it devours living matter, and a pyrovore devours flame. Except what we see with the creatures is we see the reverse. So a biovore shoots out living matter, and a pyrovore shoots out flame. Some of the characters are just named exactly for what they do. The Death Leaper, he leaps and you're dead. The Swarm Lord is the Lord of the Swarm. There's Old One Eye, who is indeed old and has one eye, but actually comes from the Judge Dredd comic, the Cursed Earth Saga. This is the same story that brings us the Land Raider, the Legion of the Damned, and the Battle for Armageddon. In fact, I talk about it in another one of my videos, things that Games Workshop have stolen off Judge Dredd in 2000 AD. So Morlocks are almost certainly named for their giant mouths or their maws. Lock is could be from locus, which is Latin for place. They do burst out of the ground. But I think what we've got here is Morlocks are monsters in H.G. Wells's novel The Time Machine. They are evil creatures that live underground and come out at night. Now, H.G. Wells, the connection with H.G. Wells is interesting because H.G. Wells actually wrote the first war game. He wrote a book called Little Wars in 1913. This is described as a game for boys from the age of 12 years of age to 150, and for the more intelligent sort of girl who likes boys' games and books, which begins a glorious tradition of both wargaming and misogyny. Similar to Morlocks, in fact made from the same kit, there's Trigons. A bit of a trickier one to work out the name. A Trigon is a type of Roman harp, so maybe that describes the kind of triangular shape from it. But also, Trigon is a term for stingray in Rome. Now, the Trigon has a poisonous tail. In fact, this is the second ray mentioned in the Tyranids so far. We had the Thornback Carnifex. A Thornback is also a type of ray. Finally, we have the Thropes. So the first of these is zoanthrope. This is from zoanthropy, which is the mental delusion that one is an animal. Zoanthropes being the brain bugs. This is kind of the opposite. You've almost got an animal that believes it's human.
Frankly, I find the idea of a bug that thinks offensive.
And then that gives us the suffix thrope, and that becomes venomthropes, who are poisonous, and malanthropes, who are generally bad. And that's the lot. If you can think of any other creatures that I've missed or you're interested in, please shout up. Similarly, if there's any other races that you'd like me to take a look at, then please mention it in the comments and I'll see what I can do there. Like, subscribe, share with your friends, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye.